pleasure to be here, and I would like to tell you very briefly what I have in mind today. Insights into the Communicative EFL classroom, and here it is what I want to cover today. I want to focus or explore with you 4 key facets of the communicative foreign language classroom. The notion of task and task dependency, the function of learner texts, the relationship between tasks and projects, and the concept of classroom management, i.e. the key role of the teacher. In my talk, I will follow a bottom-up approach by taking you, as Torben mentioned, into a primary EFL classroom in action. My data derive from a cooperative research project on L2 language teacher education for English and French, and during this project we established a database of classrooms in action. But before we start, I would like to raise the question, how do we recognize a communicative language classroom? All of you, I'm sure, will agree that classroom language learning needs to meet at least 2 basic conditions. On the one hand, it needs to be thought of and delivered as an active process, where learners invest intensive mental, effective, emotional commitment and energy in the learning task. On the other hand, it needs to be seen and realized as an interactive process that draws on and is shaped by the contributions of the learners and the competence of the teacher, her ability to manage the interaction while at the same time participating in the classroom's communicative events. Language classrooms are an environment where the students have a co-role or a role in co-creating this very classroom. In a recent book called The Developing Language Learner, and some of the reference you'll find on the back of my bibliography, Allwright and Hanks put forward 5 propositions about learners that should underlie and guide any language learning program, and I think they are also relevant for what I believe the communicative language classroom is. Using these propositions, I define communicative foreign language classrooms in the following way. They need to recognize that learners are unique individuals who learn and develop best in their own idiosyncratic way. But learners are not only unique, at the same time they are social beings. And they learn together in groups. Learning in classrooms always happens in groups. So we have this interesting relationship between the idiosyncratic individual being placed and framed, we could say, by the social group. And we know that learners develop best in a mutually supportive environment. Third, learners are capable of taking learning seriously. We know that there's a lot of research there which indicates very strongly that learners want to learn. If they don't want to learn, there may be complex reasons why they don't want to learn, but basically they want to learn. 4, learners are capable of independent decision making. They need the teacher, but on the other hand, they can make decisions for themselves and on their own. And 5thly, learners are capable of developing as practitioners of learning. They can learn how to learn. And that is crucial for a communicative classroom. Now, going beyond Allwright and Hanks, I would add a 6th proposition communicative language classrooms recognize that learners are willing and capable of expressing meaning using a different language. That learners have an interest in creating and expressing meaning. And I think, as we will see, that is a very important component of a communicative classroom. In the following, I will argue, based on our research projects, and again with reference to Allwright and Hanks, that tasks, if designed, implemented and managed appropriately, have the potential to open rich pedagogical spaces for learners. Task-based pedagogy puts, I quote Allwright and Hanks, puts language learners in an unconventional and unusually proactive relationship to their classroom learning. They have more room to show seriousness of purpose, some capacity of decision making, and space to be unique. End of quote. Even if you agree, in principle, with the general claims made above, you may want to point out that such a view of the language learning requires more than elementary language proficiency and some maturity on the part of the learners. I would like to challenge such objections because I will take you on a journey into a primary classroom in the state of Hesse, and I will argue that what I've talked about, a communicative language classroom, even applies if these learners are at the very beginning of their language learning process. I would like to take you into a primary classroom where these students have had English for half a year, not more than that. The teacher and the learners are about to embark on staging a fashion show. And you will see bits and pieces of a 45-minute lesson. You will be introduced to what I will call a target task of the fashion show. And before we start seeing these students in action, I would like you to turn to a partner and imagine what these students can do with English after 5 months of English. Could you just generate a few ideas? What will they do in the fashion show after 5 months of English? Okay, thank you very much. So let's see what these students can do.
Here we go, the show.
Here we go, the show. First, this is Tim. He is wearing a dark blue coat and trainers.
Phew. Okay. Now, the second.
In the second, this is Naomi. She's wearing a blue hat and black and red skirt and black shoes.
Ooh. Sit on the floor, sit on the floor.
Fourth, this is Alina. She is wearing a dark blue jacket and a pair of trousers.
Here we go.
Here we go. This is Hannah.
Louder, speak up.
This is Hannah. She is yellow jacket and green jeans and black shoes. Fifth.
Here we go.
Here we go.
Louder.
This is Harry. He is wearing a cowboy jacket, a trousers with yellow and black stripes and tiger silver.
Ooh.
What you have seen and what you've witnessed here is an interesting documentation of what I would call a target task. Now, a task can be defined as classroom activities, but not all classroom activities that take place in a classroom, not all activities, sorry, that take place in a classroom will qualify as tasks. Now, criteria for tasks are the following. They have coherence and unity for the learners, a clear topic and a clear outcome. And if you compare this with what you've just witnessed, this makes a lot of sense. Secondly, they have meaning and purpose. The learners know why they do this kind of task, and it is meaningful to them. It necessitates the use of language. It has a clear structure. This means it has a clear beginning and an end. And last but not least, it is a major challenge for the learners. They have to get involved actively when performing this task. As you could see, the hosts, the showmasters, spoke without any linguistic prompts, but negotiated their spoken texts from memory. Although differences between the learners in terms of speaking competence, pronunciation and intonation, range of vocabulary are obvious, all teams succeeded in completing the task. Even the girl who had forgotten the structure, the chunk she is wearing, she found a way of pointing towards the jacket and the trainers. So all students were successful in completing the task. The teacher kept in the background. No German was spoken. And by the way, the show was filmed to be used at the parents' evening, where the parents could see how the kids acted using English after half a year of being in the classroom. Now let's return to the definition of a task. A task is an activity in which a person engages in order to attain an objective and which necessitates the use of language. And when I teach my classes on task-based language learning, I always tell my students there are the three magic P's: purpose, procedure, and payoff. Payoff, the feeling of success. I have managed the task. I could introduce my partner. Now, a fashion show task, as you saw it, can be approached from three different perspectives. We can look at it in terms of task demands. We can look at it in terms of task support and in terms of lesson planning. Now, let us take a quick look at task demands. Again, I would like you to turn to a partner and define at least 5 demands of this task. What must students be able to do in order to successfully complete the fashion show task? Okay. With a main focus on speaking skills, we can distinguish at least 4 levels of competence, which each level has a number of sub-levels of demands. On a pragmatic level, demands comprise questions of whether the learners can open the show, attract the attention of the audience, introduce their model, describe the model, and close the performance. On a linguistic level, demands are concerned with the range and choice of vocabulary, the use of structures and chunks, issues of pronunciation and intonation. On the level of fluency, we want to state how fluent the learner presents his or her text. And on the level of performance, demands include the way the learner delivers the text, using body language and other means of expressiveness, but also the use of strategies. How do the learners, we can ask, cope with the demands of such a task in view of their limited linguistic means? They've only had 5 months of English so far. Now, if we had time, we could watch the same sequence again, and we could take a closer look at how the learners manage. I just want to remind you of the last person, the model, how he performed while he was described. Now, in the following lesson, he will take over the role of the moderator or the showmaster, and his or her partner will then perform. And you could see how much these learners were involved in performing the task. We don't have the time to go back, so I go on. Now, what's interesting here is that these demands can be expressed in terms of can-do statements. The learner can introduce the partner. The learner can describe his model. The learner can use his bodily expression to perform, and so on and so forth. Now, no doubt, these demands can only be met if learners have received appropriate support during the performance and through the activities, exercises, and tasks preceding the target task. And this leads me to my second perspective of task support. If you think again about the target task and how the learners acted, you might want to switch your focus now to the teacher for a moment. Now, the teacher stayed in the background. She worked as prompter. She started the first round of applause, but she was not at center stage. The kids took over the stage and operated. Now, this is, of course, completely different in the phases which preceded the target task, in the phases which focus on task support. The teacher takes a central role, and again, we will take a closer look at how she operates here. In the sequence of skill getting and skill practicing activities, as I said, preceding the fashion show, the teacher took a central role. The activities she initiated focused on revision of vocabulary, colors and clothes, the introduction of new words, the introduction and practice of phrases and chunks, introducing the model, describing the model. Almost all the activities depended on the integrated use of media, as can be seen in a minute. Now here she holds up a flashcard with she, and you will see in a minute what she wants to achieve with this. Now let's take a closer look at how the teacher works here. And I would like you to focus particularly on the learners, how the learners cooperate with the teacher in this phase of training for the target task.
All right, our two clowns. We have a woman clown and a man clown. Now, this group here tells what she is wearing, and you tell what he is wearing. Now we start with Alina. She is ready. What is she wearing? She, okay? She. What is she wearing? You can say what she is wearing. You can start here. She is wearing, okay? Jennifer.
She is wearing a hat.
All right. What else? Henry.
She is wearing sunglasses.
Okay, there are 2 glasses, so we say she's wearing sunglasses. Okay, Billy.
She is wearing nose.
1, 2, 3 noses?
Wow.
1 nose, okay. And William.
She is wearing rubber boots.
Good. What else? This group? Come on, what else? Cody?
She is wearing a pair of trousers.
Super. Helen?
She is
Wearing
wearing a jacket.
a jacket, right? Okay, anything else? What's that? More fingers? More fingers? Peggy, what's that?
West.
Right. She?
She is the west.
She is wearing
She is wearing the west.
a vest. Right. Anything else, William?
She is wearing gloves.
Super.
Yellow gloves.
And you remember that? Helen, yes, come on.
She
She's wearing...
is wearing a shirt.
Super. You can do it.
Fancy
Very
this.
good. Right. Yellow gloves. Very good. Now let's have a look at...
Let's have a look at the male clown. And then she continues, we cannot say she, we have to say, and the students say he. And so you may have realized that there's some grammar work involved here. Did you realize where the was focusing on grammar in the first sequence here? But at least 2 cases where she explicitly worked towards structural elements of the English language. Yeah?
It was about the plural.
Yes? You remember the example?
Yeah, 1, 2, 3 glasses. So
Yes.
she explained there is no way for.
That's right. So, I mean, she makes the learners aware how language functions without making a big fuss about it. It just is done kind of while the process goes on. Anyway, the other one, noses, 5 noses, 1 nose, 2 noses. Yeah, thank you. Yes. Now, and what's interesting here, the teacher sits on the table. The 2 models left and right to her. She is in control. But the learners sort of respond to what they see and how these kids have dressed up. You may want to ask the question, where do all these clothes come from? The children brought them along, and in this lesson they had a longer session where they describe the clothes. They have a long cloth line in the classroom and where everything hangs there and you can take it off and put it on. And this is the way this teacher operates in her world. Anyway, sorry. So, before initiating the description of the male clown, and I've already said that she makes learners aware of the gender differences, she and he, and holds up the appropriate flashcard. During both practice phases, when the children describe the clowns in simple sentences, the teacher praises the students and corrects mistakes. Several times she directs the learners' attention to word cards on the wall for colors and to posters and mind maps of clothes. Although this phase is hard work for the students, they seem to be engaged and enjoy this form of practice. Now, let's take us a step further. The fashion show, I said, can be called a target task. All preceding activities were different forms of exercises. What we just saw, the teacher drills the students. She is wearing, she is wearing, she is wearing. We could say this is a very boring drill exercise, but because we have the models here and because the kids have dressed up, it's not all that boring. But it is a skill-getting exercise. It is not a task. But they all lead up to the target task And working with the construct of target task is a very powerful means of establishing what I would call task and activity coherence for the learners and for the teachers. And it opens the space for participation and decision making. Having identified and agreed upon the target task, even learners in primary school working together with the teacher can establish and negotiate the steps they need to take in order to carry out the target task. The fashion show is the target task. And here, the teacher can talk to the learners about what do we need to do prior to the fashion show together in order to successfully do a fashion show. And this is why I call the fashion show a target task, which structures the things you need to do in the classroom before you can embark on the target task. I would argue the students were successful in completing the target task because they had received enough support in the practice phases preceding the target task. Now, target tasks determine the thematic points of emphasis, speech functions and vocabulary, and the selection and creation of communicative situation, discourse events in the classroom that need to be explored and or trained for. The target tasks determine the necessary exercises for the teaching of linguistic, social, strategic learning as well as media skills. Let me repeat this. The target tasks or target tasks determine the necessary exercises for the teaching of linguistic, social, and strategic skills as well as media skills. They can be complex target tasks, for example, staging a play, or simpler as a fashion show. In any case, they integrate a sequence of activities and they make the training, even in forms of pattern drills, plausible for the learners. The learners understand why they need to be trained in these skills, because they are working towards the target task. Communicative language classrooms, I would argue, recognize what David Noonan 204 calls the coherence principle, the integration of carefully and meaningfully sequenced activities and tasks. And here comes the first part of my definition of what constitutes a communicative language classroom. A communicative language classroom requires the presence of carefully integrated and meaningful tasks. We could also, let me repeat this again, communicative language classrooms necessitate the presence of carefully integrated and meaningful tasks and task sequences. Okay, let's take the next step. The fashion show is not only a target task, but can be looked at from a very interesting fourth perspective. I would call the fashion show a learner text. Could you just turn to a partner once again and try to explain to each other why the fashion show is a learner text? Why can I call the fashion show a learner text? Let's try and define what learner texts are. Good communicative tasks must have clearly defined outcomes. they need to lead to a product. And the product of a task, in most cases, is a learner text. The 5 presentations of the fashion show you have witnessed represent what I would call discourse events, involving a topic, a social situation, a context, and an audience. Taking this discourse perspective, each presentation is more than a sequence of utterances, of linguistic elements. Rather, it can be characterized as a spoken text because it has a topic, a social situation, a context, and an audience. And this is a discourse perspective on the notion of text, a spoken text. Texts are not only written, but also spoken. Now, learner texts can, of course, make use of many different genres. A poster would be a learner text. But if you present your poster, then you would have a learner text consisting of a poster plus an oral element. A role play would, of course, be, from a discourse perspective, a learner text. A film scene you design is a learner text. A poem you write is a learner text, and if you recite your poem, it would be a multimodal version of a written poem. A performed poem is a learner text, and so on. Now let me take you, let us continue with the notion of learner text and go again to a primary classroom. Here is another learner text, an example. We'll work with this for a few minutes. Now, Corinna has learned English for a year and a half. Her class has participated in an email project. Her teacher found the following text in Corinna's portfolio and asked her to provide this text to the class because it could function as a model text. Corinna's classmates could copy the text and learn how to introduce a friend. Now let's take a closer look at the text. It comes from New Zealand and it is written from Jessica Song. This was an email, interestingly enough. Now the student, Corinna, printed out the email and turned it into a work of art and put it in her portfolio. There was no need, there was no task. The teacher didn't say do this. She did it because she liked it and it came from the world outside of the regular classroom work. Now the teacher spotted this and said, wow, can you share this with all of us? It's a good model. And let's take, can you, I don't, it's probably difficult to, let me read it to you. Dear Corinna, by the way, Jessica Song is in New Zealand and she learns English as a second language there. Hello, dear Corinna. Hello, Corinna. How are you? I'm fine. I come from Korea. We are really the same because you have one sister and I do too. And you don't have a pet. That's the same too. What's your favorite movie? What kind of music do you like? What is your favorite book? What is your favorite food? I like all music and books too. You too? Do you like to eat toasted fruit? I like toasted fruit. Please write soon, Jessica Song. Now this is a perfect text talking about a friend, introducing a friend, and the teacher said, wow, this model can be shared with everybody. So Corinna's text was duplicated, handed out to all the other students, and the students could use this as a model. A wonderful learner text. Let's take a quick look at her product. Because it's interesting for two reasons. First of all, Corinna, as I've already mentioned, has appropriated this text from the outside world of the classroom through the artwork and thus made it her own product. Secondly, because the teacher's intervention, Corinna is given the chance to enrich the learning processes of her classmates. Her text becomes input for learning. With this in mind, I can offer the following 7 functions of learner texts. As an integral part of classroom discourse of a communicative event, learner texts are something positive, contributory, something to be displayed or staged in the classroom. Something to be staged in the classroom. The subject of collective engagement, discussion, and scrutiny. Learner texts are not something written for the teacher to be marked with a red pen. A lot of texts produced in school are simply means of motivating the teacher to get out the red pen. This is not what I'm talking about. Learner texts, I would say, are the fuel, the oxygen that drives learning and motivation forward. Learner texts are the fuel, the oxygen that drives learning and motivation forward. Because learners can show what they can do with the language in a meaningful way, like the fashion show. And that's why we teach the language. We don't teach the language for our learners to know about grammar, but we teach the language to our learners to give them an opportunity to express themselves in a different code. Learner texts are part of classroom discourse in a communicative classroom, and they are so important because they are a learner product and not a teacher product. And that means that they connect directly with the learner. Let me summarize what I've said about the learner text now, and there are 7 functions of learner text. And again, have the fashion show in mind. Think of what was going on there and how the learners behaved. First of all, they allow for identification. This is my product. And when the parents come and they show the fashion show, you can imagine how proud the parents are to see their sons and daughters operating in the fashion show, speaking English. Secondly, they are expressions of the individuality and do justice to learners' idiosyncrasies. If you think of what I said at the beginning in relation to Allwright and Hanks. This is my way of doing it. The way they dressed up, the way they moved. They communicate meaning. This is what I have to say. They have an audience beyond the teacher. Look, I've got something to say. Even if my English is limited at the moment, I can do something with the language. I can write a love poem after 5 months of English. Or I can be rude to somebody. Or I can be funny. That's what I can do. They communicate meaning. I've done that. They have an audience. And they derive from learners, they allow learners to be creative with meaning. And they allow learners to understand the relationship between form of language and function of language. Look what I can do with the English language. I can be a poet. I can be a storyteller. I can be a fashion show manager. That's what I can do. And of course, they allow learners to experiment with the little they have learned. And you can already see there must be certain conditions in the classroom so that learners can do this, and are encouraged to do this. Now, of course, learner texts are also a means for assessment, self-assessment and teacher assessment. But this is only one of the functions. And of course, teachers want to see how well learners can perform. And they will look at what learners do. They will take notes and say, oh, this learner needs some help in pronunciation. Here, you know, this learner might need more support in learning his or her vocabulary. And the learners themselves say, oh, I do need to deal with, well, I was kind of shaky, forgotten the structure and so on and so forth. Yes, self-assessment, teacher assessment are also part and parcel of the 7 functions of learner texts, but only one of the functions. Now, this leads me to the second part of my definition, what communicative language classrooms are all about. Communicative language classrooms provide the necessary space for learner texts to emerge. So we have the task component and the task coherence idea, exercises and tasks, and the learner text. These learner texts spring from actively involved, socially engaged individuals, individuals who are given both an opportunity and a reason to express themselves. The result is that they create meaningful discourse because they have learned to bring together an array of linguistic and semiotic means of expression. Let me read this again. Learner texts. These are texts that spring from actively involved, socially engaged individuals. Individuals who are given both an opportunity and a reason to express themselves. The result is that they create meaningful discourse because they have learned to bring together an array of linguistic and semiotic means of expression. Let's take the next step. Let us return once again to the concept of target task in connection with the notion of backward planning. Projects, I would argue, are not more than collections of task sequences structured by one or more target tasks. This is a basic structure of projects. We could argue that the fashion show was a mini project which is appropriate for early learners who've had 5 months of English. Professor Schmidt already mentioned the famous airport project. And I would like to focus for a few minutes on the airport project. Now, the airport project can also be conceptualized according to this model. And there were 2 target tasks in the airport project. Target task 1, conducting the interviews at the airport. Kids, after 1.5 years of English, went to the international airport in Frankfurt and conducted interviews with English-speaking people. To be able to do this was the first target task. The second target task in the airport project was were the reports on the best interview. The students usually conducted about 10 to 12 interviews at the airport in about 2 hours. They had the task then to select the best interview and prepare a presentation of the best interview as a wall chart or as a role play and whatever they wanted to. Now, I would like to focus on the interview task. Here are the kids. This was in 1982, and I was much younger then. My hair was long and black, and so this is. And again, I would like you now, because you've now learned the concept, or you've been confronted with the concept of task demands. Could you again put your heads together, 2 of you, or 3, and define the demands of the interview task. What are the demands of conducting an interview as a non-English speaking person after a year and a half of English at the international airport, and your task is to interview and conduct interviews with as many people as possible and bring back the best interview back to school. So this is, of course, for kids a highly complex situation. It not only does it presuppose the mastery of linguistic inventories and communicative strategies, it also asks for a variety of social, managerial, and instrumental skills. They had to operate in groups, they had to take notes, they had to videotape what was going on, they had to audio tape what was going on. So there's a lot of demands posed on the learners, and I just want to mention a few. They had to cooperate in groups and divide labor. They had to find a partner at the airport, approach them, signal that they want to interview them, or conduct an interview. They had to be prepared to be refused. They had to be quite polite. They had, of course, limited linguistic means, and they had nevertheless to explain the purpose of the interview. Why do they do this? They had to be able to deal with difficulties because they were confronted with a variety of English speakers. Some of them were from Australia, others from the United States, others from Britain, others were from Turkey and spoke English. So how to deal with these varieties of English is a major task, and they had to learn how to deal with these difficulties. They had to work autonomously. There was no teacher there anymore because they were all groups moving about. They had to record the interviews. So you could see there are many, many demands put on the learners. Again, if you think of backward planning, all this had to be prepared before so that learners could act successfully. Now, as I said, this is one possible way of thinking of tasks. I just want to mention a few further typical target tasks so that you can start thinking about projects. They all will follow the same principle of target task and pre-task activities that lead towards the target task. For example, if you think of this changing a short story into a film. You've read a short story in class, and now you start, let's select a couple of scenes, interesting scenes, and we turn them into a film script. And we do this in groups. You do this part, you do this part. Would be an interesting target task. And the foundation for a project. Stage a talk show based on a current event. NSA is quite an interesting field right now. Should we stop using Facebook because of NSA? And what are the difficulties here, and so on and so forth. Produce a book of student poetry. Give a presentation on one of the US states. Yanis Kaliampos has done this very famous US election project you may have heard about, and he won a prize for it as an outstanding project. Of course, it basically was structured the same way as, it's much more complex, of course, but it had a number of these interesting target tasks. Develop a blueprint for a dream school. Might be a very interesting target task for a project. Now, having identified and agreed upon a target task, learners and teacher establish the steps they need to take in order to carry out the task. In other words, they work backwards in their planning to derive the pre-task exercises and tasks which will help pave the way towards the successful completion of the target task. This leads me to my final point about the communicative language classroom, the key role of the teacher. Managing communicative classrooms depend on a number of things. If we return once again to the dynamics of the fashion show task, it will become obvious that the quality of tasks and how they relate to each other, their dependency on each other, their design in relation to demands and support, only represents one side of the coin. The tasks are important, absolutely. All these features are no doubt necessary conditions for the communicative classroom. Tasks with a clearly defined goal, but which allow the pupils a lot of intellectual and creative freedom to design their own route towards the solution of the problem. They all will enhance learning. These task features are necessary, but not sufficient. They are not sufficient conditions of the communicative classroom, unless teachers have learned how to implement, manage, and accompany tasks as participants in the interaction. Tasks and exercises can easily turn to shale on the beach, become empty shells and mindless gadgets. It is the teacher who matters. And again, I would like you to put your heads together and come up with the 7 most important tasks of the teacher in a classroom I have outlined here. Okay? It is the teacher that matters. And here are some of the things I would like to add. I'm sure you found more. One is maintaining and safeguarding safety and motivations. Learners need to feel safe that they can take risks. And for these teachers, for these kids in the fashion show, it was clear they could take risks. Now think about older students in the phase of puberty. What is it? What kind of risk-taking is at stake there? But language learning, because you are limited linguistically, has to do with risk-taking. And you need to provide the security, the safety for your learners so that they want to do this. This is of course only possible if the environment and the tasks you work on are meaningful. No student will take a risk for dumb things or for stupid things. So this goes together. Now keeping the learners focused on the task. This is not easy. Students might be tired, they are not in the right mood, and it's not always happiness in the classroom. Many things go on. Supporting language comprehension and production. Focus on form when appropriate. It would be a misunderstanding to think that form is irrelevant. And you could see this very well in the fashion show. You do need to be able to work with the chunks. You do need vocabulary. You need to work on your pronunciation. So form is important, but the question is when and how is it connected to my target tasks and the meaningful operation. And of course, reflecting on task output and process afterwards. Was this good we did? Do we need to change this? So I think the teacher also needs to be able to step back and together with the learners, look at her or his teaching. Did we really arrive at the goals we wanted to reach? So, as I said at the beginning, the communicative language classroom is one which is co-constructed between the learners and the teachers. And there are many more. I'm sure you found a number of things which I didn't mention here. This is a graphic representation of the classroom I have in mind. The meaningful and relevant tasks, but the interactional support through the teacher and the peers. And support is extremely important. You can dream up all these wonderful project ideas, but if you don't provide the support, they won't work. So I come to the third strand of my definition of what communicative language classrooms relate to. They relate to teachers and to the actions that a teacher takes to create the conditions for a learner text-driven classroom. And Borg, unfortunately I forgot him on my bibliography, but I have a very interesting quote here which I want to share with you at the end. Language teachers are, quote, active thinking decision makers who make instructional choices by drawing on complex, practically oriented, personalized and context-sensitive networks of knowledge, thoughts and beliefs. Now this is a typical academic definition. I put this in simpler words, and I think this is what we want to say. Teachers need to be facilitators and instructors. I think there's again a misconception, you know, when people walk about and say, oh, teachers are just facilitators of learning. No, you have something to say. So they are facilitators and instructors who can develop target tasks together with the learners, who can help sequence the pre-task to provide the support, who can create a supportive and motivating atmosphere, and who can support formal learning when necessary. To achieve excellence in language education, to create a communicative language classroom, both sides of the coin need to be given appropriate attention. The quality of tasks and task sequences, and the competence of a teacher. In conclusion, I could say that research in and observation of successful language learning strongly indicates that the communicative language classroom is a classroom characterized by meaningful tasks and task sequences, which have as their outcome learner texts, both spoken and written, and multimodal texts as well, and which are facilitated through a well-managed, task-based pedagogy. And with this, I have come to my end, and I think you were very patient. You listened to me for 1 hour, which is quite a bit, but you're certainly welcome to ask questions, and I like to engage in discourse if you feel like it. Oh, what's this? Oh, sorry. You have a bibliography at the back of my handout, and I thank you very much for your attention, and the floor is open for questions.